Hey guys, welcome to the channel. If you're new here, my name's Axel Brown and I am an Olympic bobsled pilot. Today I'm going to be running you through, quite literally running you through how we run on the ice. It's not exclusive to bobsleigh, skeleton do it the same, but I'm just going to give you the lowdown on how we run on ice. So let's waste no time, let's get straight into it, let's go. Start to a bobsleigh or a skeleton run is one of the most important parts. There's kind of three components that make a bobsleigh or skeleton fast, and the start is the main one. It's the one that everybody sees. It's the only time you see us as people before we load into our sled. But you might be asking yourself, you might have seen it on the TV and think, what is actually on their feet? How are they running on ice? Well, the answer, in short, is with one of these. So this is what we call the ice spike. So it functions in much the same way as your athletic spikes would. The main difference being the actual spikes themselves. So here we have 250 tiny little metal spikes. Instead of your usual 7 that you might get on a track spike, we have 250 of these little ones. Now, the benefit to that is that it spreads the load out. It also doesn't chew the ice up as much, but it allows you to get much more grip, because if you were relying on just those longer single spikes, if one of them doesn't grip, you lose that grip across your whole foot. So this is dispersing your grip across your whole foot and allowing you to push without any movement. So when your foot contacts the ground in one of these, it doesn't go anywhere. As long as the ice is hard and hasn't been chewed up by the people in front of you, this has so much grip. You're not getting any slippage, you're not getting any movement. The rest of the shoe, you want it to function in the same way that a sprint spike was. So you want a firm underfoot so that when you're gripping the ice, you've not got too much bend in the shoe. So if I compare, so that's for bobsled, but for skeleton, they have a much bendier shoe. So this is actually a skeleton spike. It looks much cooler in the all black, but you can see same deal on the underneath. And that's because skeleton athletes, they're bent much further over. Their angle of attack is much further over than a bobsledder. So we want that firm, not as much bend. So you've got that firm plate, just because of the position that we're running in. Part where this becomes an issue is when you get out at the bottom of the track and you're on the uphill for the braking straight. You've got to remember, actually, you've got no grip on your heels at all. I've actually fallen over when having to maneuver a sled out of the ice last race before the Olympics, and I fell onto a part of the sled and it cut the inside of my thigh right open because I was having to walk downhill holding 170 kilos of sled, trying to stay on my toes, and ultimately I didn't, slipped onto my heel and went fully over. So a lot of long distance runners and stuff like that, they're taught heel toe when you're running, but in actual fact when you're sprinting, which is really what we're doing, we're pushing but we're sprinting, everything is on your toes, and in these it has to be. The second your heel touches the ice, you've got no grip at all. Now the other component to bobsleigh is the load in, and especially on a 4-man, this becomes a big issue. So in a 4-man, you're on the side of the sled and you're having to load across and jump into the sled over what's called the bale. So the bale is a piece of carbon fiber, a part of the sled that sticks out the side, which actually helps with the sled contacting the sides of the track as it goes down. But in a 4-man, that part is used for loading in. Now this is another part where you really have to stay on your toes. So as a 4-man brakeman, you need to load across, plant your foot on that bale with your spikes in. Again, if you're on even the base of your foot, if you're even putting the load through the middle of your foot, you're going to slip over, and that's often when you get these really spectacular falls off the sled. It might be that they've landed with their heel, it might be that the spikes have just missed the bale and they've lost their footing, but those lead to some really tricky incidences. Thankfully, it's not something that I've ever been a part of. I've always managed to get in, but I know it can be tricky and it really catches out some experienced brakemen. Your spike is really a key part of your equipment when you're bobsledding. You have to look after these things. First off, they're not cheap. A pair of these will run you around 200 to 250 euros. So that's near enough $300. So you really want to look after these things. You can see right here that I actually caught mine when loading into the driver's seat of my sled, and so I've got a little tear there, which is less than ideal. But these things you really need to look after, not only because they're expensive, but because they're such a key part of what we do. If you can't rely on your spike, then unfortunately you're going to be going to the start thinking, well, what if I slip? What if my heel comes out the back? Because we had one of our athletes actually try this exact spike, and his problem was that his heel kept slipping out the back because of that flex in the spike. So you have to find one that works for you and that works for kind of your running style. I've always preferred these ones, these white Adidas ones. They're now made by On, I think, when in actual fact they're made by one factory in Germany. They're just then branded by another company. But you really have to trust these, and you really have to look after them. So there's several things that you can do to kind of look after them. One is that when you're running, the spike plate, the brush spike as we call it, can get full of ice and full of snow essentially. So right before we go, we lift our shoes up and we have like a wire brush, and we'll brush the end of the spike to make sure that there's nothing left in that, because obviously if this is all built up with snow and ice, then that completely removes any grip that you've got, and you're going to slip on your first step. And if you slip like that, chances are the sled's going down without you, and nobody needs that. The other thing you can do is you can actually spray a water removal or a lubricant like WD-40 onto the spikes, and that means that the snow and the ice and stuff doesn't stick to it as well and will flow off. Lastly, you need to make sure you've not got any little bits of tape or any little bits of wood or anything like that, because the start block is made of wood, so that can chip out. Often the block at the bottom of the track where you take your sled to once you've finished, that can be made of wood. And these little chips can get into your spike, and they can really hinder the amount of grip you've got. You know, if you have a piece of wood taking up, you know, right in the middle of one of these rows of spikes, you're losing all of that grip. And in a game of hundreds or even thousands of a second, all of these things help. So these are really an important piece of equipment, and something that you really need to make sure that you're getting right and that you're staying on top of, because ultimately they are your contact with the ground. Lastly, the unfortunate thing about such a spiky shoe is that when you're loading into a sled, it's not just you. Unless you're doing monobob, which is women's only, it's not just you. There's a pilot and or the rest of the team with you. So when you're loading in, there's lots of instances where the pilot, myself, might take the brakeman's shoe to the back. So we had that earlier this year when I won't name the athlete because I'm sure he wouldn't want me to. He actually loaded in. It was his first time loading in a two-man, and he spiked me right in the back. So you imagine I had 250 of these little spikes right into my back, right at the start of a mile of ice when I'm trying to concentrate and trying to keep my head in the zone, and then bam, you've got spikes to the back. The other issue is when you're loading into a four-man, you've got three big guys all trying to envelop themselves in each other to load into the sled in this tight space, but everybody's feet are extremely sharp. And again, I can only speak from my personal experience, but I remember once in Park City we were trying to brake our four-man, and unfortunately the guy on the brakes, his feet slipped off his foot pads, and the next point of contact was my lower leg. So both his feet went straight into my calves, and that's how he was bracing to stop the sled. So I became his foot pegs, and my calves told a sorry tale afterwards. In fact, I still have the scars 5 years later. But overall, you know, it's a small danger in what is ostensibly a dangerous sport, but ultimately these things are a fantastic bit of kit. They're largely incredibly reliable. They're super grippy. Honestly, when you really make contact with the ice, you're going nowhere. So you can put all of your force, all of that effort, all of that inertia to get the sled moving through the ice without any worry of slipping. So that is how you run on ice. This goes to show how sharp they are. I've just pricked my finger whilst bringing out the shoe to demonstrate it. Well, what I was going to say is thank you so much for watching, guys. Please like and subscribe if you've enjoyed this and you want to see more bobsleigh content. I'm going to be answering a ton more questions. I got some footage. Ow. But regardless, thanks for stopping by. See you next time, guys. Bye.